Everyone, today I'm doing a video on how is it that Christianity is actually a branch of Buddhism. Now, obviously people have heard that Christianity is a branch of, you know, Abraham or Judaism. Um, but how is it actually a branch of Buddhism? So it's kind of like, you know, how everything has kind of a mother and a father. And so here you could say, I guess the mother is Buddhism for Christianity. So back in the day, there was a king in India, and his name was Ashoka, and he conquered most of India. And then I guess he got tired of all the slaughter and whatever, and he converted to Buddhism. And then he decided that instead of going out and conquering everybody by force, he was going to do it religiously. And so he got lots of Buddhist monks, and he sent them along the Silk Road to spread Buddhism. And like this whole epicenter of Buddhism was around near the Ganges. Um, anyway, so some of these monks went over, and there were some uh, Indian, Greco-Buddhist kingdoms that formed, but not all of them. Like the farther you went from India, the fewer monks got there and the less converted people came. However, it does seem that they did make it to the Middle East. Well, they definitely made it to the Middle East, but in Jerusalem. Because around the same time that Ashoka's monks got to Jerusalem, there formed a new group of Judaic ascetics called the Essenes, or as we call them now. Um, and this is the same group that later on uh, was the kind of main inspiration for many of Jesus's teachings. And we'll get to that. There's quite a bit of interesting evidence in that regard. And I guess might as well talk about it now. So there is a lady, Dolores Cannon, who did hypnotic regressions on thousands of people. And one time she came across someone who had, in a previous incarnation, lived amongst the Essenes during the time of Jesus. And she confirmed that, yeah, Jesus was there, and he learned from them. And historically, it's very apparent that many of the teachings of the Essenes are the same as the teachings of Buddhism, and they're also the same as the teachings of Jesus. Some authors have even gone as far as to say that um, most of Jesus's teachings are simply a reiteration of the teachings of the Essenes. Um, most Essenes simply stayed in their own communities and didn't go out to talk to anybody to like convert anybody or anything. And so Jesus was somewhat of an exception in that sense, where he studied with them, but he never really fully joined them um, and their monastic existence. So let's talk a little bit more about how it is that we know the Essenes are related to Buddhism, other than the obvious commonalities of having compassion for all beings and having many of the same quotes found, that Jesus said, or almost verbatim what the Buddha said. Um, there's also the fact of the name, the Essenes. Now, this is not a Hebrew word, and they can't really find the etymology from Hebrew, and because, well, it's not a Hebrew word. It's actually an Indian word, uh, Eshani. Essenes. There's two S's, and often, an S is written, especially in Hindi words where they're actually pronounced as an sh sound. Um, so, anyways, it's not a big drift. But anyways, Ishani is Ishan is a name for Shiva, and Ishani is a worshiper of Shiva. So from this, we can derive that not only were they Buddhist, because, well, we know of all the commonalities, the most likely that the monks that managed to get to, Israel, and talk to a group of Israelites or Jews and convert them, they were most likely Shavist, or Shavist, not exactly sure the pronunciation, Buddhists. So in Buddhism, it's quite permissible to have a blend of multiple faiths. So since, for instance, in Japan, there's Shinto Buddhism, and where they blend the local Shinto beliefs with Buddhism, and in China, they can blend Taoism, or Chinese traditional religions with Buddhism, because the Buddha didn't actually say anything about God, yay or nay. He said it was pretty much irrelevant, so that kind of leaves the door open. So this particular monk, uh, that had come from the area of the Ganges, was also a believer in Shiva. And so he, considered himself as an Ishani. And then, he converted the other people, and they were also Ishani. And then the Essenes. And we know that it goes beyond the name. So, for instance, there's the common practice in Christianity, which is known as baptism, and this is very different from anything in the Hebrew or Abrahamic thing, because, well, no one else was doing that. I mean, they live in a desert. It doesn't make much sense. Uh, no, not too much water. But it's actually a very common practice amongst Hindus to go bathe in the holy river of the Ganges to purify themselves. And Shaivists are no exception. They also do this. And so it quite makes sense that this was actually a carried over tradition from the Shaivists, where uh, they taught, of swimming in the Jordan, uh, or, cleansing themselves in the Jordan to help, as the holy river that was available at the time. Um, and so John the Baptist also, you know, studied with these scenes. And this was also verified by the same people that had remembered the past lives where they saw. And I can link all this down, all about these various things. Actually, you can check it out. I put it all up on a website called greenjesus.ca. Um, right. So what else was there? Well, the Essenes, they also lived in a very monastic way. So, for instance, their priestly caste did not marry, and this is just the same as in Theravada Buddhism, where it was kind of the oldest strain of Buddhism, which was around at the same time as this whole exodus of many monks to spread the teachings. And so celibacy was a common practice amongst monks. And this was considered a fairly unusual practice because, like rabbis and stuff, they have wives and children, but the Essenes did not. And they also did not use money. And that's one of the precepts for a monk is to not use money. And they actually had a very kind of communist existence where they weren't attached to any belongings. And this is another thing that is also very common to Buddhists and not at all common to the other Judaic classes. um and so there's even more similarities, of course, but that's enough to kind of give you an overview. And I guess some of the most important parts actually is compassion for all beings. So these scenes had compassion for all beings, and Jesus has compassion for all beings, and that actually gives him the mark of being a bodhisattva, which is someone who has achieved bodhicitta, which is the compassion for all beings in a desire to help them reach liberation. Um, and so it is the same for everyone else. So if you happen to be a Christian and you want to follow in the steps of Jesus and really understand his teachings, then it's a good idea to study Buddhism and to yourself follow the path of the bodhisattvas and become a bodhisattva yourself, as Jesus did in his own time. So that is how you know that Christianity is actually a branch of Buddhism because of all of these interrelated things. Um, all right, and all of those kind of heartfelt wishes and all of those kinds of happy moments. I know some people say that the New Testament is nice and that the Old Testament is not nice. And a lot of where all those nice things came from in the New Testament, a lot of that is actually from Buddhism. And so feel free, you can still believe in your Abrahamic God if you wish, just as Jesus did. Buddhism has nothing against that. But you can also benefit from the teachings of Buddhism to help enrich your life and help cultivate compassion for all beings.